Good evening. My name is Santiago Schnell. I'm the William K. Foundation Dean of the College of Science, and I would like to welcome you to today's Gold Mass lecture. You probably know a little bit about this, what I'm going to tell you anyway. So the Gold Mass is a relatively new tradition in the United States, named for the color of the hoods worn by individuals graduating with a doctoral degree in science. The Gold Mass is also associated with St. Albert the Great, who is the patron saint of the scientists. The first Gold Mass for scientists and engineers was held in November 15, 2016 at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. And Notre followed the tradition in 2017 by hosting not only a Mass, the clerical event, but as well we have a lay event, which is a lecture that I'm now introducing. And for us, it's very important at Notre Dame this lecture for the following reasons. So Notre Dame has a rich history of connecting science with the Catholic faith. The connection began back in 1819 when John Sun, who was a priest of the Holy Cross and taught science and served as my predecessor. At the time, he was the department chair of the Department of Science. He founded a magazine called Catholic Science and Catholic Scientists. And he started to publish a series of articles in the magazine, and he gave a series of associate lectures that got converted at the end into a book that is called Evolution and Dogma. The book was published in 1896. Interesting, the book traced various histories of evolution from Aristotle to Charles Darwin, insisting that the belief in evolution of the human body from a lower creature was wholly compatible with the Catholic dogma. And as long as the direct and immediate creation of the human soul by God was accepted, there were no problems. People differ from him. He was convinced that science and revelation couldn't be in conflict since God was the author of both. But despite of his best efforts, Evolution and Dogma was a pretty controversial piece of work and fell afoul with many intellectuals and the Vatican. And Father San got cancelled. So it was quietly ordered out of circulation, the book, and since it seems problematic to reconcile evolution from the biblical historical creation. And it's a good example of a scholar. So what Father San did is that he continued engaging in a dialogue and expounding each of the controversial issues that he raised in the book in a series of lectures every summer for 4 consecutive years. And after that, so the cancellation was over. And thanks to his contributions in the dialogue of science and faith, Pope Leo VIII awarded him an honorary doctoral degree in 1895. There are only 2 of such degrees ever awarded. So the Gold Mass lecture series, we're revitalizing and following Father San's spirit of engaging in a free and scholarly dialogue of topics at the interface between science and religion. Today, I have the pleasure of introducing our 2020 Gold Mass speaker, Dr. Stacy Trasancos. Dr. Trasancos holds a Ph.D. in chemistry from Pennsylvania State University and worked as a senior research chemist for DuPont. After converting to Catholicism, she left her career in DuPont to stay at home with her children, while also earning a master's degree in dogmatic theory, publishing 5 books on the integration of science and faith during that time. Currently, she's pursuing a second master's degree in systematic philosophy. She's a fellow of the World of Fire Institute and teaches online science and theology courses at Seton Hall University and the Holy Apostles College and Seminary. In her talk today, God, Angels, and Electromagnetic Radiation, Life Among the Invisible, she will describe the wonder of modern science offers to our mind and the ways our knowledge of the atomic realm can bring us closer to God. All we have learned and we have yet to learn is magnificent evidence of the faithfulness of the loving and personal Creator. And hopefully we're going to learn from her much more. Let's give her a warm welcome to our guest speaker today.
Thank you. Thank you for that introduction. All right. Well, it's wonderful to be here with you tonight. I'm so honored to be invited to speak to you. and tell you a little bit about what it looks like to integrate faith, science, religion, theology, philosophy, how to try to have a holistic view of the world. So I've worked with Notre Dame, I don't know how many years now, probably going on 6 or 7, in different capacities, but I've never actually visited the campus, so this was a really nice treat to get a tour today and to go to the Gold Mass. I worked with the McGrath Institute teaching high school teachers, science and religion teachers, how to integrate faith and science in their classroom. We did these summer intensive camps down in Louisiana. I also published my book, Particles of Faith, with Ave Maria Press, and I've never visited them before, so I'm going to get to do that tomorrow. In Particles of Faith, and Father Terry and I spoke at the Catholic Answers Live conference in 2018, and we were like on the radio together. It was really cool. It was fun. And you also helped me with the book a great deal. So in that book, one of the things that I was helped with was don't just write about the questions, like what do we do about evolution, what do we do about the Big Bang, what do we make of quantum mechanics, what do we make of neuroscience, when does human life begin? I wrote about those issues, but the publishers asked me to put myself into it, which I didn't really want to do, because if you're just writing a book about the issues and somebody criticizes the issues, no problem. If you're putting yourself into it and somebody criticizes that, it was scary enough that when the book actually published, I was horrified that people were reading it, but because it was very personal. But in the first part of that book, I talk about my conversion to Catholicism. I didn't call myself an atheist. I didn't call myself a materialist. I didn't call myself following scientism. I didn't call myself an N-O-N-E, nun. I didn't use any of those words, but I suppose that's what I was. I tell the story in there how I grew up Baptist, left my religion when I started college because I was pursuing science, and I honestly thought science had all the answers, and this religion stuff was just for the people that just like to go to church on Sunday if they felt like it. It really didn't seem to make any sense. And I loved chemistry, though. I loved the way it explained how things happen at the atomic realm. And so somewhere along the way, I just totally got into chemistry so much that I really did start to, even, I guess the most extreme example is I called my own kids highly complex composite systems, my best productions, at my thesis defense, where I was talking about inorganic, organic composite systems that I grew. I called them my best ones, and they were sitting on the front row. And I think they're still scarred to this day because Mom was like that. And it made it really hard for me to form relationships. So one reason I talk about that mindset is I get the impression there's a lot of people in that mindset still today. And I think there's really good news when it comes to faith, science, theology, philosophy. I think there's really good news to help bring people. I think science is a great tool for evangelization. So I tell the story in the book about how trees made me so mad, because my graduate work was trying to simulate photosynthesis. I was trying to copy the process of photosynthesis, and if you've taken a biochemistry class and done that chapter, you know it's a lot of stuff. It's a lot of equations. Those chloroplasts are like little nano factories doing things, and I was just trying to get an electron to jump 2 times in a composite structure and stay put, photo-induced electron transfer. The chloroplasts do it like 10 or 20 times. Multiple times per femtosecond. I mean, it's just going really fast. And I couldn't get it to jump 2 times. And I remember looking out my window when I was about to cry in graduate school, which is a no-no, right? You don't cry. But I was panicking because I couldn't make the electrons jump, and I wasn't going to graduate. You have to do something in graduate school before they let you finish. And the electrons weren't doing what I wanted them to do, and I panicked. And I looked at a tree, and I got so mad at that tree. At the same time, I knew I was looking at God. I knew I was looking at some magnificent thing that some really great chemist constructed in the tree that I had no chance of obtaining. And that was kind of my comeuppance. I converted 15 years later. It took a long time. And I'm Catholic now, of course. But the thing I didn't realize is once I converted, you're not done. You know, like conversion is not a one-time thing. It's something we all do all our life. You're constantly turning your heart back to God, turning your mind to God, trying to learn more, trying to understand your life. So I want to tell a different story today about another conversion period in my life. This is our house that we used to live in. We lived outside of Boston for about 9 years, and it was very busy, very crowded. And I converted there, and the church says be open to life, so I'm like, okay, I'm open to life. And I had 2 children already. We had 4 more girls in 5 years. 4 babies in 5 years. And I just knew I was being such a great Catholic because I was doing that, you know. And I was so happy. I'm like, I'm having all these gifts. God has given me these gifts, these beautiful children. And then, after 4 daughters, they're all teenagers now, by the way. After those 4 daughters, I had a miscarriage, okay? So we're all going to have times in our life when you have to really ask yourself, what do I believe? And that, for me, was one of those times. I had a miscarriage. And it devastated me because I was all in on the pro-life thing. That zygote is a human organism from the very first moment of fusion between the sperm and the egg. There is a new human there. There's a new little Trasancos there. And even though it was an early miscarriage and the doctor's like, don't worry about it, it's just a chemical pregnancy. I was like, yeah, that's really tempting just to say, chemical pregnancy, don't worry about it. But I knew better. And so I was devastated. Because I chose to love that child, I was devastated. Well, then I had another miscarriage. I tried to stand on my head to not have the miscarriage. It was a very trying time. And it was after that second one that we moved out of the city here. Okay? So what was going on in my life then is I was very upset about that, the loss of 2 children. And we moved to this 20 acres with a lake, and that's a 100-year-old hunting lodge. It was very rustic. But for the first time since I had converted, first I made peace with the trees. I wasn't mad at them anymore for doing photosynthesis when I could not. But I rediscovered creation. And I know y'all can do that here on the campus all over the place. It's so beautiful. I rediscovered God's handiwork in creation. You can see it's very beautiful there up in New York in the fall. And I remember standing outside. It was so quiet. We didn't have any neighbors around. Just re-looking, re-listening, re-observing everything that was going on. And I started to think about, what do I really believe? This is the front of the house, just so you get a feel for what it's like. Very rustic. These are my 4 daughters. The other kids are not shown. I'm not sure where they all were, but these 4, you know, they got to grow up. You can see how they're looking up. I love this picture because they were just blown away by the majesty of these trees and the sky and everything. And so I took a lot of walks. And that brings me, I'm just giving you the background to this slide. After we moved to that cabin, I had 3 more losses, 3 more miscarriages. And at this point, I'm pretty mad at God because God says be open to life. Since I converted, 10 pregnancies, half survived. And I was mad. I'm like, you say be open to life, and you're giving me death. And I would like to just not care about this. I would like to just shove it aside and say it doesn't matter, but I know it has to matter. So for me, it'll be something different for you maybe in life, and maybe you've already had trials and suffering. This was the thing that got me to thinking, because I really had to ask God, what do I believe? I had to ask myself, what do I believe? if I believe those babies were little Trasancoses, the Trasancoi clan, then I have to love them. But the thing is, it was really hard to love something I never saw. It was very abstract, and I thought, okay, I'm struggling with this because it's abstract. I don't know how to think about abstraction. And I thought, no, that's not really true, because in science, you have to think abstractly all the time. I've never actually seen an atom. I've only seen things made of atoms, and I've learned how to manipulate atoms and make compounds and new materials and things like that. So I thought, no, it's not that I'm having trouble abstracting. I thought, well, then maybe it's that you're having trouble thinking about a being in abstraction, the little baby. Maybe you're having trouble visualizing that. And I thought, not really. Like my grandfather passed away, and I understood that he died and his soul lived on away from his body. I thought that's not what I'm struggling with so much. What I was struggling with was loving in abstraction. I was struggling with loving something that was abstract. And those babies were abstract. I mean, except for a test that showed 2 lines, I didn't have anything else to do much with those. I never saw them. I don't have any memories of what they look like. I don't know what their personalities were like. Yet, we're asked to believe that their souls live on and that I will see them again someday, entrusting them to the mercy of God. And I could not get my head around that. And I realized probably it's because I can't get my head around loving God in abstraction. So when I became Catholic, I did the RCIA classes, I studied theology, I had all the boxes checked on the intellect part. Well, I won't say all of them, but I was trying to think about things. I knew the proofs for God, I knew how to argue about it, I knew how to think God exists, but I don't think until that point I really owned it. I really let myself love God. And it became clear to me that for me, this is a do or die moment. I have to figure out how to love these 5 children, because if I don't know if I love God. God's just a thought, a concept. And so I stood there that day looking out at our lake, and those little clouds drifting up kind of look like angels, I thought. They look like they were angels, and I thought, no, it's just water molecules. There's warm air from the sun rays, and it's condensing in the air above the cold water mass, and it's just fog. But I went out that day, and I stopped there, and I decided I'm gonna say a prayer. I was alone, so I was getting a little goofy with it and very dramatic. I'm going to say a prayer. And I named them all Jose Maria, because Joseph and Mary, it's a male and a female name. Some people, when they have miscarriages, they say, oh, I think it was a girl, and they name it a girl name. I'm like, I'm not one to divine ontological status to things I've never seen before, so I don't know. So we're just going to name them the same boy-girl name all the way across the board. So my 5 Jose Marias, I'm out there, and I'm looking at all of this, and I start thinking, and I took a picture of it because this is what motivated me. This is what moved me. God, first of all. Where's God? I'm looking at the whole scene, and I'm like, okay, I know we learn in theology that God is holding everything in existence. God created everything. But I'm standing out here, I think I'm alone. Where's God? I don't see him there. And I did start thinking through science and my belief. That is how I find him. I start the chemical equations for photosynthesis start clicking away in my head, how the electron transfers through the Z-scheme and how the protons fill up inside, and then it drives the synthesis of NADPH and ADP to make the 3 carbon precursors for all of biomass. And I'm thinking about the chemistry of what I'm seeing, because I know something about the chemistry of what I'm seeing. And I'm thinking, God's doing all of that. And he is here. And I have to get my head around that. God's here with me. God's here. He's holding me in existence right now. And I was even thinking through like the 5 ways, like the first mover, the first cause, the first being, goodness, ultimate goodness, and governance of the world. And I was thinking, everything is moving. Like there were pine needles where I was standing, and like the pine needles underneath my feet look like they're laying dead still, but they're not laying dead still. If you get down at the atomic level, there's a whole lot of motion going on there. There's decomposition. There's things inside the atom moving all around. Everything is moving. So God is causing all of that movement. If there's movement, therefore God. That's the first of the 5 ways. And there's cause there too. There's something causing that fog to form. There's something causing those leaves to be there. There's something that caused the shape of the landscape to be what it is. There's something that causes the sun to shine. There's something that causes the sky to look blue. And there's God, the first cause that started all of that. And I'm thinking of being. That's where I start having problems. There was a first being. There is an uncreated being. And that's the part about love. I'm thinking about that. But that's also like what we do in biology, right? In biology, there is life. And biology itself doesn't really tell you what life is. You just study life once it's there. And so for there to be life, there has to be a first being. And it's clearly good. And that's another thing that I struggled with. Okay, so the world is good. I get that. But sometimes things that aren't so good happen. There's suffering. There's this problem of evil and suffering. But then the last one is the governance of the world. Clearly, there are laws and order. I mean, a chemist, a scientist, depends on there being laws of nature and order and governance of the universe, because if it were unpredictable, you wouldn't even be able to make a hypothesis and design an experiment and test it. So there has to be order there. And it fits with everything that we see. And I remember Aquinas said something about the existence of God is self-evident. But he said it's not really self-evident if you don't want to see it. It's self-evident in that God doesn't exist. Like existence isn't something we say about God. God is existence. For things to exist, there has to be God. God is existence. And so I kind of left it there, that phrase, God is that thing that which nothing greater can be conceived. So I'm looking at all of that and I'm thinking, I can see God here. Like all the things that are holding that in order, all the causes, the movement, the beings, I can see that there's God there. And of course, we also believe that the whole Holy Trinity creates and holds everything in creation. So there's love and order and rationality. And it's here for us. It's our creation. So then I started to look at that more as a gift. Creation is a gift to us, just like those children. Then I started thinking about the other one, angels. Okay? So I encourage you to also examine what you believe about God. Make sure you're not just thinking about God, that you're also loving God. But angels, how many of us, because I forget about angels, how many of us think about our guardian angels on a daily basis? How many of us think about the angels and the realm of angels all the way up to the throne of God, the highest angels, the hierarchy of angels? There's so much life going on in that invisible realm. There's so many angels. And did you tell your angels to be here tonight? Are you guardian angels here? And I just neglect it. Like I don't think about the angels. I think about the visible world that I can see. I'm not thinking about the angels. Angels, of course, are spirits without bodies, right? Spirits without bodies. Bodiless spirits, minds. They don't have imagination like we do, so I'm struggling with this scene trying to imagine God and trying to imagine angels as the fog, but we don't use our imagination for that. We use abstraction for these beings, and we can love the angels. The good angels are never going to fail us. They were created at the beginning of creation, and the good angels, filled with grace, chose goodness for all time. And so we can totally trust these beings that are fighting, guarding on our behalf, guarding us. And so although I couldn't see it all around, there were probably demons trying to get me to doubt my faith, and there were angels fighting on behalf of me in spiritual warfare right there as I think I'm standing all alone. There's probably all kinds of things going on. I know what's going on at the atomic level a little bit, but there's also this spiritual warfare that's constantly going on. And I don't know if y'all get tempted by demons, but sometimes it's like gnats flying around your head, the negative thoughts. They won't go away. The doubt, the insecurity, the fear. And you do have to push them away. And if you do pray for protection, you will find that peace. You will be protected from it. So I'm like, that's pretty cool. I think I'm standing here alone, but there's insect life, there's fish in the pond, there's a beaver in the pond somewhere, there's God holding everything in existence, there are angels here, and I'm talking about these 5 babies that I'm trying to figure out why I love. And then the other thing that you see in this picture is light coming from the sun. St. Augustine wrote, when he was writing about the first 3 chapters in Genesis, in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth. He wrote that the city of God. He wrote that book, The City of God, and he said that there are 2 cities. There was the heavenly city and then the one on earth. In the first 3 days of creation, when the earth was without form and void, and darkness was upon the face of the deep, without sunlight, that the light, he's describing this, the light that first kindled the sun was the holy light. It was the unchangeable wisdom of God. And that's what Father Terry was talking about in his homily, this unchangeable wisdom of God, the second person of the Holy Trinity, that was the light. He called that the light. It was an eternal light that shone on the angels. It was the divine illumination, if you will, that the good angels had, that grace they had, and they chose goodness. So there's something very special about light in the way we see it. It's 2 different kinds of light. This divine light, this eternal light, it's not physical light. It's understanding. It's the divine light of wisdom. And the angels were illuminated by that true light that was created in them, the light that St. John speaks of in the beginning of his gospel, in the beginning, which starts just like Genesis. In the beginning, God was the Word, and the light that created everything else, the same light that became man to redeem humanity, the second person of the Holy Trinity. So when God said that let there be light, he says, there was a progression of the holy light to the physical light that we see, the energy light in the universe. And I'm trying to put all that together. Now, you have to use your imagination because we're not angels, we're humans with bodies, and we need to put our imagination glasses on. And this is really simple, and if you're studying chemistry, this is probably something you learned back in high school. But I've learned to have a really deep appreciation for the basics, for the simple fundamental things, because it was kind of lost on me when I was younger and studying chemistry, and I've come back to it. When you work in the lab long enough, and those of you who work in the lab know what I'm talking about, you start to see the world like the things you spend your time thinking about. You're thinking about chemical equations and how atoms click together and break apart and form new bonds, and electrons rearrange and form stability, and there's equilibrium changes. You're picturing that in your mind so much that you kind of think that way. I remember one time I worked with the transmission electron microscope so long that when I walked outside, I swear I was seeing the same thing in the asphalt on the parking lot. Which was bad because I was supposed to be seeing something ordered in the transmission electron microscope, and I wasn't. But you do have to train your mind to see things at a very small level. So this is kind of a fun little, I know if you're doing chemistry, you know the mass of a proton, and it's got like a big negative 27 kilograms out there for the exponent. But I like to, when I talk to people that aren't scientists, take them down into that atomic realm just to get you an idea of how small it is. So I like to use a sugar cube. I know since COVID, nobody probably knows what that is anymore. Do you know what a sugar cube is? Do you know? It's about 4 grams, little bitty thing. Half of that sugar cube, let's cut it in half so it's 2 grams. And this is kind of fun. I still like to do it. In your mind, like you can close your eyes if you want to, but you don't have to. Imagine, put a picture in your mind of that sugar cube, like pull it in front of your mind and cut it in half, dispense with half, okay? So we got half a sugar cube. Now, cut that half a sugar cube, don't take it down to its grains, cut it into 1 billion pieces. So you kind of get, go ahead and try it, you can't. The human mind can't do it, but just try, lots of pieces. So you got your, lots of pieces out there. Dispense with all of them except 1 piece, okay? Now, cut that 1 piece into another billion pieces. It's just because you're just like, okay. And we're thinking abstractly now. Dispense with all of those pieces except for 1. So now we've got a billionth of a half of a sugar cube. Now take that last piece and cut it into just 1 million pieces this time. That is it's a little heavier than a proton. Really close. This is Beaver Stadium at Penn State where I went, holds 110,000 people. The size of a proton, the mass of a proton rather, is 1.67, so rounding it up to 2, times 10 to the negative 24th grams. That's a billionth of a billionth of a millionth. And in the atoms, this is something else you see in high school textbooks a lot, but it still blows my mind. If you put the size of a glass marble in the middle of that stadium, that's where the protons are in the atom. And the rest of that space is other stuff, electrons doing their thing, whizzing around in their energy levels. But the cool thing about these atoms, when they're made like this, in those energy levels, so I'm going to give a real quick chemistry lesson. Light and color come from there. Everything that we're seeing is coming from the electrons in the energy levels. So you learn about this, you learn about spectral lines. And so notice that when that little ball, that little electron, fell to a lower energy level, a quantized amount of energy, a little energy packet, left. And that is electromagnetic radiation. That is light. And so that little energy packet leaves, and it's got a certain wavelength, it's got a certain frequency. Even Einstein put it to an equation. It's Planck's constant times frequency, and it can be equated with the speed of light. But that is where light comes from. And this is just a real simple diagram. I actually used it when we were teaching the high school teachers down in New Orleans about what happens here. These little quantized packets of energy that come off when electrons change energy levels, if they fall down an energy level, it gives off a little packet of light, or they can absorb packets of light. And here what we're showing is it doesn't matter how much light, it matters the frequency. It matters what that frequency is. And so if it's not the right frequency, it's kind of like in the pinball machine, you don't pull the thing back hard enough. You can pull it back all day long, but if you don't pull it hard enough, the ball never goes anywhere. It has to be a certain frequency to get out and move. But this was discovered. This is something that was discovered in the natural world. Photoemission is sort of like that, but it's when electrons join an atom and fall down to another energy level, light is given off, or jump up and fall down and light is given off. But what was noticed was in the atom, this is what I think is so cool, and I think it was lost on me when I was first learning about this, is it's so quantized. It's a little energy packet that equals the energy that's gained or lost. And it's predictable. And so in the electromagnetic spectrum, the visible spectrum is just part of it. It's the only part that actually hits the rods and cones in our eyes and we can see. We can't see the infrared, microwave, up to radio waves. We can't see UV, X-rays, or gamma rays. But we can see this. But there's other electromagnetic radiation. But what comes out of those atoms is because of those electrons jumping around. We see white light. We think of light as white. That's because it's in a continuous spectrum. It's all the colors. But the neat thing is that each atom has a fingerprint. Why does it have a fingerprint? It's cool. So this is just the hydrogen atom. Turn it on. This is just the hydrogen atom. And you can see there's just one little electron there. And just breaking this down, there's a lot of transitions, and it only gets more complicated as you go up with other elements on the periodic table. These are not in the visible region, these are not in the visible region, but these transitions are in the visible region, the Balmer series. And so hydrogen, with its one electron, has these different series. And it has this spectrum. So what was discovered was that when hydrogen was heated, that these lines would show up. So they're not continuous. That's one of the ways that we knew that there was quantum mechanics, that you had these quantized energy levels. And you can even see it. These lines correspond to about these numbers. And so that's something that's, when you see those lines, you're literally looking at something that's happening in the atom. And we do this, of course, what I was doing with the teachers down in New Orleans was we were just doing flame tests. It's really simple, but to make sure they understand where those colors are coming from. So if you take lithium, just to show you how much more complicated it can get, it's got 3 electrons. There are more lines because there's more transitions occurring. There's more opportunities for electrons to jump and relax. If you take something like strontium down here, has a lot more electrons in the energy levels, you start to see something like this. So this is a fingerprint for each element. It's how they know what's in the stars. They can look at the fingerprints of these elements, and there's lots of uses for it. These lines start to broaden out because there's so many transitions in the same region that the bands look wider. I find that amazing. I find it, again, it's a basic thing, simple concept in chemistry, but everything we're seeing is coming from this order and structure in the atoms. All the colors that you're seeing, all the light that you're seeing, is coming from there. And the light rays are hitting your eyes, rods and cones are doing, it gets really complicated there. They take that light and they transmit it into electricity or energy and send it to your brain, where your brain sees that color. Another use of radiation, of electromagnetic radiation, that blows my mind, and again, I don't know if I'd call it simple, but it's a basic thing that you learn in science. The second. We time the second now, we didn't always, by the cesium-133 atom. So the cesium-133 atom has these ground state electrons, and so they're not jumping to other energy levels. They just kind of move in place in the ground state. They call it hyperfine splitting. It's like 1,000,000 times smaller transition of energy. But it's enough that it gives off radio waves. And the radio waves come off, and they can measure them from the cesium-133 atom. And that electron jiggles 9,192,631,770 times. That's a second. Like, does that blow your mind? That in the time it takes to say that, somewhere in the world, the cesium-133 atom did that many little motions, the electron in the ground state, did that motions. And it's so predictable. It's so ordered. I mean, we think the ancients were amazed that the sun comes up every morning and sets routinely, regularly, faithfully. This is faithful in the sense that you can trust it'll happen. It keeps happening. And so that's how we define the second. And these were just updated in 2019. So even since the day I was on the pond, this has been updated. But that number is then used, I just want to show you, that number is then used for other basic units, like the meter. So take the speed of light and divide those transitions by the speed of light, and that's how we're now defining the meter, which is very basic in science. You need seconds, you need meters. You also need kilograms. The kilogram is also based on this number. So they set the kilogram up with using the speed of light, using Planck's constant, and calculate a kilogram. A kilogram used to be an artifact. It used to be like the kilogram set in this lab over in Europe, and that was defined as the kilogram, and it was the international standard. They now define all the base units, also the ampere, the Kelvin, the mole, and the candela, by the cesium-133 atom transitions. So not only are those atomic transitions, all the light that we're seeing, that's how we measure time, that's how we measure mass, that's how we measure length, all that stuff. Now, what does that have to do with the lake? It changes the way you look at something like that. It changes the way you're interacting with it in a personal way. It changes the way you're looking at it. It changes the way you're thinking about it. And for me, when I'm suffering, so I was upset about losing those babies, when I think about all those things that are happening, when I think about it, I sense that God is there. I sense that God loves us so much because He's holding all these things in existence faithfully, along with the angels. And so what I did that day, I'm standing there and I'm like, this is the cathedral of creation. I'm standing out here in this cathedral of the creation. I'm not alone. God is here with me. The angels are here with me. And I'm like, all right, y'all, we're going to say a prayer to the Jose Marias. We're going to have a little prayer. So I felt a little bit like Simba, Mustafa showing Simba the circle of life on the hill. But I'm there and I'm like, to the angels, to God, to creation. I'm like, okay, my children, I felt a little weird. Like, you formed in my womb. I don't know every detail of how that happened, but I know that there was a fusion of the gamete cells, and through this beautiful orchestration of chemistry, the DNA formed together, and it started to make you, and then you started to multiply, and you started to grow. But I did not give you breath or life or soul. I didn't do that. God made you, the one who made all of us, the one who made all of this out of nothing, kind of invoking the Maccabees' mother when her sons were being martyred. And I stopped then, and it hit me, because this is the affliction of materialism. You have a hard time seeing the whole. I'm studying philosophy right now, and I argue with my fellow students and my professors every day about how do you know what a nature is? How do you know what a genus is? How do you know what these things are? I have a very hard time looking at the whole. But I stopped after saying that, and I saw the whole. I saw it all working together, all of this stuff. And I said, God will restore you to me in His mercy. I believe that. And I added, Mommy loves you, even though I felt kind of strange. But that's when I realized how intimately my love for God is tied to everything that I love in life, my people. God is love. And I'll always long to know those 5 babies. I didn't get to ever meet them. But I also know I'm satisfied that to the best of my ability, I loved all my children unconditionally. And that was the best I could do. But it did change my life, because after that was another moment of conversion for me. After that, I started to see this everywhere I went. Everywhere I went, I'm living among the invisible. I'm aware of the angels that are all around. I'm aware of the demons that are trying to mess with me, and I've got my angels there just cover me like a shield. I'm aware that God is holding everything in existence. I changed my prayer. Thank you, God, for my existence. Thank you for the existence of the people in my life that I love. And I recently read The Consolation of Boethius. Have any of you read that before? I know you have. I recently read it, and I love the way that lady philosophy, so in this story, Boethius is about to die. He's been arrested, he's in jail. He enjoyed good fortune in his life. He had wife, children, things, status, power. And it got taken away from him because he was accused, he said unjustly, and put in jail. And he was awaiting his execution, and he writes this book, The Consolation of Philosophy. And it was lady philosophy. So he imagines this woman coming to him who's superhuman, and she's consoling him. She's reminding him that you are not a prisoner of your fate. You are not a prisoner of the bad things that happen to you in this world. And she explains to him towards the end of the book this image of concentric circles. And I'm like, oh, like the atom. But it's this image of concentric circles. And what she's telling him is, in the very center, this imagery that she gives him, in the very center is this passing, no time is passing, this momentless instant, this timeless instant in the very center. It's infinity, it's eternity. That's where God is. And everything out here swirling around, moving, because the center's not moving, everything out here moving around is like fate. And she's explaining to him what he knows about philosophy, that to seek the good and to practice virtue, it doesn't mean that you are a slave to fate. And so she says, the closer you move into that center, it's like saying the more you conform your will to God's will, the closer you move into that center, the less you're affected by fate and what happens. There will still be fate. There will still be good days, bad days, loss of fortune. You could lose everything like Job. But you won't be bound by it. You won't be in shackles by it. It won't control your happiness, because if you make $1 million and then you lose it, it's not like you ever really had it. Whereas if you learn to practice virtue and you learn how to seek goodness and happiness on the inside and you own it, you'll always have it if you learn to love God. And so the imagery she's giving him is, stop trying to be out here slave to fate and what's going on. Strive to come closer, because that's where you're really free. And of course, he's about to die, so he's trying to understand all of that. I like that image because it reminds me of saying the world is governed, that there are things that have to happen. God is going to have things happen in this world. And the more we try to conform our mind and our will to his, the more we will also be free. The more we will start to see good in suffering. So I just gave you one example of suffering in my life, something that was suffering. We recently in our family, just last month, one of my daughters had a baby very early at 28 weeks, and she had worked very hard to keep him alive and stay on bed rest, and he was born, but he died 11 days later. And that was very devastating for our family, and I returned to these thoughts. That's why I'm thinking about it. I return to these thoughts, like as much as we don't want people we love to die, as much as we don't want bad things to happen to us, as much as we don't want to suffer, there is meaning and purpose in it if you do those things. If you remember that you do live among a whole lot of invisible stuff going on, that God is as faithful as 9,192,631,770 jiggles of the cesium-133 ground state electrons. I memorized that number because I think it's so cool. God is so faithful. And it gets you through those times, because when I was a lot of you guys' age, when I was in my 20s and 30s, and I wasn't religious at all, I was just a chemist. And let me tell you, chemists can be control freaks, because we know how to control atoms, and that's what we do, and we try to control things. I tried to control everything. And you, of course, learn that you can't control things, but I didn't want to suffer. I didn't want to have any pain. And now being further down the road, able to turn around and look back, it's kind of like when you see all of creation and you think about the angels and you think about God, and then you turn back around and you look at where you've come, it starts to make sense. You start to understand better why things happen the way they do. So if you haven't quite gotten to that point yet, I can just say keep the faith and keep going and keep trusting. For me, whenever I'm suffering doubt, or I'm like, God, where are you? Why did this have to happen? Why aren't you here? I've said to people, kind of jokingly, that I find my consolation in the periodic table. And people say, oh, that's where I find my pain. But I do find it there, because if you look at that, there's no missing parts. There's one successive proton after the other. It all fits together. There's properties, and there's ways we understand how those elements are going to interact with each other, and we can make all this technology like we're using now, using electromagnetic radiation, using the materials we make. We've done all this wonderful stuff. And that's what gives me strength in my faith. So that is very much. I used to talk about the integration of religion and science and philosophy and theology and those things. I used to talk about integrating those things in a very academic way. But I think the real right way to integrate those things is through love. You got to understand that you're talking about love. And when you keep all of that in mind, I call it, the Catholic Church has the fullness of the truth. It's like you're living a fuller reality, the invisible and the visible. So here's the guy worshiping, love you, God. Do you really love God, the unchangeable wisdom, divine illumination? Is your guardian angel and all the other angels part of your life? And by the way, they don't really look like that. We just have to have images, right? Because we're human. And do you stop and thank God for your existence? So that's a real simple story, but I hope you remember it. I hope you become more aware of the invisible realm around you. When we pray that prayer, I believe in God the Father Almighty, creator of visible and invisible. Think about these things, because it is a fuller way to live. And if you're a scientist and you're able to think about things happening at the atomic level, whether it's biology, physics, or chemistry, that's even like more cool, because you see more of what's going on. You know more about the reality of things. And I think that's something to get excited about. So that's how I have decided at this point in my life to integrate those things. And I hope that helps you to live among the visible and the invisible. Thank you. Yeah. Okay.
See if this works. I have the microphone, and I'll bring it to you if you raise your hand if you want to ask Dr. Trasancos a question. Okay, 1, 2, 3. That'll be the first group. Mr. Richard.
Out of curiosity, how often do you have to remind yourself of some of these things? Or, I imagine that an experience like that is not just sort of a, that's it, now you don't have any problem. How often do you sort of lose track and then have to sort of revisit that lake or whatever it is?
That's a very good question. Quite often, but my problem is I forget to do that. It's just like forgetting to go to adoration. I don't make it a priority. Father Terry and I were talking about the significance of learning to sit in silence, and how we really, I'm sitting in silence. Here's my cell phone. I just want to check email really quick. And we become so beholden to those things, which have light in them, though. But I have to remind myself pretty often, because there's just something. People call me a recovering materialist, and I think I will always be a recovering materialist. It's hard for me to stop that mindset. And I just look at things, I forget about y'all are composites, body and soul. You're not just atoms. And I have to remind myself of it quite often. But when I do, it does make everything so much more amazing. Like doing something like cooking spaghetti sauce, you're like, wow. And you're thinking about all the things that are going on. To me, it just makes life so much more exciting, and you appreciate more.
So who are the other?
Thank you so much. Yeah, your talk was amazing. So thank you so much for sharing your experience. So I study physics. I am Ph.D. As well as you, I had my journey in faith. And I was curious about, especially what made you to convert, because in my experience and the experience that I have heard from others, it is, especially from people that do science, it is I would say that faith speaks its own language, and the language that we have, like by doing math, by doing physics or science, is a language, a beautiful language that you can work out equations and discover beautiful things. But it is when you want to go to another word, it's like you lack the words to speak it properly. So I obviously, how, but it's not obvious because it's like almost invisible, like. So yeah, how, I was wondering, what made you to convert?
I converted because, like in my 30s, I was very lonely, I think is the word, because I didn't understand human relations. If you don't look at people as having a soul, you just look at them materialistically, you're not very good at healthy relationships. And I knew there was more to life than chemistry could explain. Because like the noble gases are kind of like stuck up, they don't bond with anything much. And, you know, I actually it's no offense, I don't like you, I don't want to bond with you. It's just how things are. And you got to try harder. Like to learn empathy. Empathy is a word that took me a while to try to understand. To see the world through someone else's eyes, you've got to stop controlling, stop talking, and learn to listen, and learn to let things play out organically, as they say, and not control. But the language is totally different, and it's hard. It is hard, very hard for me it was hard, I can do it now, to read theological documents. Like, make the point already. Like, there's a lot of fluff here, you already said that. And somebody's like, just read the whole thing and the picture will start to form. And like, why couldn't they have just written it a little more logically and then I would follow it better? Reading philosophy for me now is also very difficult. I don't understand the language. I need a dictionary for it because I don't understand the language. But here I am in my 50s going to classes again. So what I would encourage you to do is take up that study on your own or take some classes or start to learn about the other language of philosophy and theology. Because there's lots of beautiful ways where they can come together and overlap. That's one thing I would love to start. I mean, I've got a lot of ideas, but I would love to start a program that actually, and I know these are already happening, but where philosophers, theologians, and scientists come together, but with a very specific goal of like redefining some words in a way that we can all agree on them. Substance means one thing in philosophy, it means a totally different thing in chemistry. And just start thinking about those things. But I get what you're saying about the language. It is hard.
Listening to your talk, I was reminded of the book of Job in the Old Testament. How after he had lost 10 children, and he became so angry with God, bitter, and finally God speaks to him, and God doesn't answer his complaint, but rather reveals to him the beauty and the joy of creation. He says, when I laid the foundations of the earth, and the sons of God shouted for joy. And after listening to God, Job says, I'm going to shut up. I'm not going to complain anymore because of the sheer beauty of God's creation. Not that Job has sinned in his complaints, because God says, no, he spoke the truth about me. But God led him to a much deeper experience of himself through creation. And I saw, certain parallels, between Job's experience and your experience. So it occurred to me that you would be highly qualified to write a commentary or a reflection on the book of Job.
On the book of Job. It's not lost on me, thank you for that, that Job didn't know that Satan and God were having this conversation. He's like, let me get your boy. And he's like, you go ahead, he won't lose his faith. And he didn't even know that was going on, or know that he would still be examples for our lives this much time later.
Okay, in the middle.
Thank you for your talk, and I totally agree with you that when you study science, you can see a lot of proof that persuades you that God exists. But it makes me, I just want to ask you, what made you choose your religion? Because I don't think faith and religion is not the same thing. And why is religion important to you? Or is faith and religion even separate for you?
Yeah, they're separate things. So faith is accepting the testimony. So you can have faith in something or faith in someone, and we have faith in someone, that being versus just things. We have faith in someone and accepting the testimony of someone. So divine revelation, when Christ came and told us about the Holy Trinity, about incarnation, about salvation history, it's most reasonable to accept the testimony of God, right? That's like the most reasonable being in the world you can accept the testimony of. But then, which religion, is that what you're asking?
Right, because the movement of electrons doesn't really reveal to you what religion to take.
Exactly. Why Catholicism for me? Because every question I've had, I've been able to find an answer to it. The catechism, I was like, because the Baptists don't have that. They don't have a catechism. And I was like, get out of here. I dropped the book. I mean, the first thing I read was Children Are Gifts. And I just never thought about it that way. That's a poetic word. But when I have a question, I can look it up in there. I found that immensely helpful. I find the coherency and the logic of the Catholic faith compelling, the history of the faith, the sacraments, and how it all comes down to the Eucharist, because that makes a lot of sense, that our whole faith kind of comes down to those, something Father Yaki used to say, that 2-letter word is. When Christ said, this is my body, we're like, gotcha. That's what you said. And so you have to do this crazy thing of kneeling down and believing in faith that bread becomes the body of Christ and the wine becomes the blood of Christ. And you're just looking at it. And when I was converting, I'm like, to the priest next to me, I'm like, okay, the electrons are not doing anything different. Nothing's happening. No bonds are being broken between the atoms. There's no energy input exchange. It's just there. And you want me to go, that's not only a new substance, that's the Lord of the universe. That just became, the priest is like, yes. You believe it or you don't. But if you do believe it, everything else changes. Everything else changes. It all flows from that. It's the source and summit of our faith. So I really found that compelling.
So if you did not had the religion, do you think you still have the faith within you, or do you think religion is just essential for the individuals to keep their faith? I'm so sorry.
That's okay. No, I'm glad. Those are great questions. Yes, it's essential. It's kind of like, how could I love my husband if I just called this man up and said, I have faith that you're my husband. I have faith that you're, doing your part of the marriage. But I didn't spend any time to get to know him. I mean, actually, there are marriages broken all over the place because the two spouses don't take time to get to know each other. Because the more you know someone, the more you can love someone. And so the Catholic faith and all the things that we learn through the sacraments and the treasures and the encyclicals and things that we can read down through history and the Bible, Scripture, it all fits together to get to know God more. And for me, science is just another way to get to know God more, to get to know the mind of God and how it works. That allows me to love God more. So I have to have both.
Another question right here.
Hi, you talked quite a bit about how part of your journey through grief was in moving past feelings of anger. Do you think that there is any room for anger in grief?
Very good question. Yes, I do. I think it's a necessary thing that you got to grapple with, because when I was angry with God, at least I was still having a relationship with God. And I have learned, because as a materialist, or whatever I was, I just had a facade. You know, this was the Stacy that you saw. I just tried to put on the perfect appearance for everyone, and I did not deal with my emotions. Like, as a chemist, I didn't really understand what that meant, emotions. And I didn't deal with emotions, and I think a lot of people suffer from that too. They don't know how to deal with the emotions, and so I've learned to. So I would say if there's anger, there's probably something underneath it causing the anger, and you have to examine yourself to figure out where it's coming from. Don't just stuff it.
So you're using the analogy of the actual atom to understand relationships with God. But if you are not quite familiar with that analogy, do you think you would have actually come to that understanding? Because you as a chemist, you have that familiarity. But if someone who, say, studies physics or studies the social sciences or studies like why people work the way they work, would they still come to that understanding? Would they come up with one unique to what they're familiar with?
Probably what you're familiar with, because God put everything in you that you need to do the things you need to do in your life. And if you're an artist and you see God in the beauty of the painting, that's how you're made. So everybody's different. So I think find what speaks to you. As a mother of 7, I say that to my own kids all the time, because they try to compete with each other. They think that they have to be just like mom, or then when they become teenagers, they're like, I don't want anything to do with you, mom. And I try to help them figure out who they are.
So I first of all want to thank you very much for being here, being a woman, being a scientist, and talking about like miscarriages. Like, that's very unique for this section, for this university, and I'm really grateful to be here at this moment. Like, so many people in this room also, and our families have suffered from miscarriages. So to have a representative like you talk about it out in the open, it's very comforting. So thank you.
Thank you. It's a very confusing loss, because there's nothing there that you can see or touch.
There's 2 questions over here.
Yeah, so I know you heard this already, but thank you so much for sharing about your personal experience. And I also studied chemistry in undergrad, and now I'm studying astrophysics here in grad school. And this is still a pretty significant challenge for me, and maybe you faced it in your career as well. How do you approach having a conversation with your peers in science that tend to have a pretty strong opinion against your beliefs and faith? So how do you approach starting that conversation with them to encourage them to have a different perspective? Or how do you, I guess, maybe sometimes combat self-doubt when you have so many other people in the room who are, in the field of science, brilliant people saying something completely different and have their own opinions about your faith? How do you kind of come to reconcile that with your own faith?
It's hard. I've started looking at everybody that God puts in my life with a question mark over their head. Like, what is the purpose of these people being in my life? I was telling a story earlier. I sat next to a R.A., radical atheist, on the plane the other day, who's also a scientist. And I prayed for the right words. But what I think works best, what works best for me, because I don't like to push too much. I think that does harm if you push too much. I don't like to brag, look how holy I am, and don't you wish you were like me? I don't like to do, obviously we shouldn't do those things. I like this imagery. Don't be a doormat and don't be a bulldozer, okay? So don't let them walk all over you. Don't just lay down and be a doormat. Don't bulldoze people either. But I think of Mary. Stand like a column for the truth and live your life in a way that they are saying, I want what he's got. Because I did that. I knew Catholics like that before I even considered converting. And I knew they had something I wanted, some peace and some joy. But they weren't pushing on me. But with that scientist on the plane the other day, I just left it at this. I'm like, I see science as the study of God's handiwork. He doesn't.
I first want to say thank you so much for your bravery to share something so personal and tragic in your life. And I also wanted to preface my question by saying it could potentially come off as a bit sensitive, and so I say it with complete respect and also understand if you don't want to respond to it, of course. So, at the lake, during your moments of contemplation, you mentioned that you were considering the guardian angel that was with you at that time, offering you some protection. I'm wondering if you were also, at that point, considering the guardian angels of your lost children, and if so, how did you grapple with that sort of coexistence of that sort of dichotomy?
Actually, very beautifully. I did think of that, and that's a great question. I don't think it's too sensitive at all. We can believe, correct me if I'm wrong, Father Terry, I think we can believe that those embryos even have guardian angels, because if there's a soul, there's an angel. If there's a body, there's a soul. So I was kind of like, we're having a little party, because I have all these angels. I have their guardian angels, my guardian angel, all the other angels. And I very much, this is the beautiful thing about it. There was this controversy about limbo in the church for a while. Some theologians said that children who are unbaptized and die don't go to heaven because they're not baptized, and so they go to limbo. The church clarified that, I think it was 2007, that we entrust them to the mercy of God. So it would be presumption to say, I know they're in heaven, but you can also baptize them by desire. You can, God knows, you would have put the water and done the formula if you had the chance to baptize them. So baptism by desire. But the fact that the church didn't just say, absolutely, here's what happened, if I just know they were in heaven, I would have been like, all right, y'all are good. I'm just going to forget about you and do my other part. What actually happened is, entrusting them to the mercy of God has turned into me having a relationship with them and their guardian angels, because I pray for them every day just like I do my other children. And the wisdom there told me, loving is hard. The wisdom there was if I just said those were chemical pregnancies and losses, never thought about it, I think it would have weighed on me very heavily. But instead, I kind of have this relationship with these beings that I never met, and pray for them.
Let us thank our speaker one more time.
Thank y'all.